Aloha, everybody. My name is John Kempf, holistic health and fitness coach. And today on the podcast, I interviewed Dr. Jack Kruse, a neurosurgeon and one of the leading pioneer voices in the space of quantum biology and circadian biology. I first heard about Jack in a podcast episode he did on Rick Rubin's podcast, The Tetragrammatron, with Andrew Huberman. And it was an incredible episode, really insightful and inspiring for me. And I've been an avid follower of Jack ever since, watching dozens of his podcast episodes and learning so much from him, and had the blessing and opportunity to interview him for you guys today. So we covered some of the information in Jack's three-legged stool. His three pillars are light, water, and magnetism. And we talked a little bit about the backstory, some of the current events and future implications of those. And I put a PDF Google Doc in the comments section in the show notes that has all of the episodes on YouTube from Jack's interviews that I've watched. And then I chronologically ordered them in a way that I think is appropriate for anyone that's new to his work or looking to dive deeper. You can check out that Google Doc PDF and just have a nice resource that has a lot of his content all in one place for you. And if you guys have any comments, please drop them below for us, and any other questions related to this episode or questions for future episodes that I can ask Jack next time we sit down together. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy. Dr. Jack, thank you so much for taking the time. Welcome to the show.
No problem.
So I just want to start off to set the scene for you. May 2023, I'm outside on my front porch and I'm listening to the Rick Rubin podcast with you politely handling Andrew Huberman. And you blew my mind on that podcast. It was really enlightening, and someone that's got a background in health and fitness, hearing someone say fitness and nutrition isn't the most important thing was one of those mind fucks where I knew you were right. With my personal journey over the last decade, since 2013, I've been on my own journey, and I've been doing everything I can to get into nature, to get more sunlight, to get off of technology. Someone running an online business, that's been a wonderful opportunity and a challenge. And so I was blessed with the opportunity to move to Maui in 2018 from Washington State. And I've been working on getting more sun, getting more nature, getting off of tech as much as possible. My intuition's been driving me in that direction. And then I'd never heard of you before. I find this podcast, I listen to this podcast, and I knew you were right. Everything you were saying, the science is obviously, you're a master in your craft, and I am new to a lot of the information at this time that you were speaking about. But with my kinesiology degree, I understood enough of what you were saying, and I knew it was correct. I was like, damn, this guy's fucking right. Like fitness and nutrition, like when you gave the example of people with mitochondrial diseases not getting well when their fitness and nutrition is dialed in, and some of the other examples. I mean, like, you've got the evidence, man. It's there. And so that was
I
huge
think
for me.
I think I think the best evidence though is the stuff that's staring people right in the face, but they don't even realize it. It's the space program.
Mm,
You have to ask yourself a question. You take somebody who's fundamentally in the best shape you possibly could be. Everybody knows that astronauts, cosmonauts have to be pristine, but yet when they're up a week in space, just a week, they lose 20% of their muscle mass and they're exercising. They're
mm,
and they're all their food is completely controlled, like a metabolic ward. Yet, what do we know from probably the best example, which is Scott Kelly and his brother, two identical twins. One stayed here, one went up there, and in 240 days, one aged 10 years. That was supposed to be in phenomenal shape. So when you actually see this, and remember, they had to pull Kelly
mm.
out of the capsule because he could not even move against the gravity of Earth when he comes back. This should get everybody who believes it's about diet and exercise to say, well, we have a guy that's got a metabolic ward level diet. He's
Hmm.
doing all the exercise through Vasper that NASA has. Like, this guy's got the best gym in the world. Okay. But the environment is different. And what happened? Like, I can't give you a better example of why um, I'm right and they're wrong. And then when it gets really crazy, is then I really flip the tables and say, okay, everybody who is listening to this podcast effectively is an astronaut that lives in space, except you're on the tectonic plates and you don't realize it because non native EMF all around us actually mimics exactly what being in space is. It has the same exact effect on astronauts. The only difference is the dose makes the toxin. As we
Hmm.
saw in the Kelly example, that happened in 240 days. In the example of astronauts on Earth today, it takes 2 to 3 decades for the same diseases to show up. In fact, these are the same diseases that also showed up in King Tut.
Hmm.
So you go back and go, wait a minute, there is no Gold's Gym then. There was no, special diet, tied back to then. Why? Why do these things seem to travel through eons? Like, this is not a question for me to really answer for you. I think for your audience, when you sit down and have a discussion with me, you have to remember I've done this morbidity and mortality conference, in my head multiple times. I mean, I didn't believe this when I first realized it either. Why? Because I went to medical school. I was taught that diet and exercise were all that matters. And I'd love to tell you that I have the resolving power of being that curious when I was in training to ask those questions. But it turned out it wasn't the case. It wasn't the question I really asked until I was finished with my training and going through my own health issue where I employed what they told me to do and I actually got worse.
Hmm.
So I would tell everybody, no matter where you are in this podcast and you're watching it, you need to question everything you believe. And when you do that, you will find out that biophysics has some very counterintuitive rabbit holes that you'll go visit. You'll find out that the environment is what controls the software that controls your ultimate outcome. All of you have been led to believe it's the hardware, it's the DNA and RNA. It's not true. It's the software, and that's the mitochondrial programming. That's actually the epigenetics that Scott Kelly found out about before DARPA removed his book because he wrote about it. He said, look, when I went up to space in 240 days, I came back, I lost 27% of my muscle mass. He goes, but the big thing is I became hypermethylated and I had histone problems. So my risk of cancer is huge. And literally, you can't find his book anymore because DARPA took it off the market. Why? Because the people in power that are selling you diets, exercise supplements, peptides, whatever it is that you're into today,
Hmm.
that's the Rockefeller paradigm that's built around the Flexner report. They want you to keep believing that story. Why? Because this is a multi-trillion-dollar business for them. And when you fundamentally get to that level, that's when I think when really most people get to where I'm at, it's you've tried everything, nothing really works, and then you go, okay, let me give crazy a try. And then all of a sudden, magically, you find out, wow, it really is the environment that matters. And it's not just in diet and exercise, it's exactly what happens in addiction, too. I mean, this is the reason why we create drug addicts. Why? All you got to do is put them in a blue lit environment, especially get them to go out at night, and you can create a drug addict pretty damn quickly. Um, and the interesting thing is, you can let a drug addict stay with their heroin, but if you change the environment they're in, you'll start to see they stop using because they don't need it, because the endogenous opioids that your brain makes out of POMC, which is, a chromosome on chromosome number two, magically cleaves beta endorphin, and you make an endogenous opiate, you don't need it. And what stimulates that? Wow, sunlight. Oh, how do you like that? Well, you come back to the same story and you start going, you ask yourself this key question. What actually really is true that they tell us? And that was probably the most important thing that I said to Huberman on Rick's podcast, that nothing is true. 99%. And if you remember from that podcast, he asked another neurosurgeon that runs UCSF called Eddie Chang what he thought. He said 50%. So you have two guys that are neurosurgeons. And for anybody who doesn't know about us, we're the top of the pyramid in medicine. We're the smartest guys. There's only 3,800 of us. We all have attitudes. Uh, but it comes down to, you have the smartest people in medical school telling you that most of what you learned in medical school is bullshit. Well, that should be an eye opener for like everybody. Because if you're not questioning the paradigm that's being sold to you, then you're apt to be knocked down by the sausage grinder you're headed into. And that's really, I think, the key germane point, because everybody's N equals one's different. Like the questions that people will ask about this disease versus that disease. Yeah, they're different, but fundamentally, if they're tried, or I should say tied to the grand unified theory of the software running the hardware, the story of actually biophysics, in my opinion, because I've been accused of making this too hard. They want me to retard it down for people. And I'm like, it's really simple to understand. The inner mitochondrial membrane is a piece of territory that goes from NAD to oxygen. And in between those two fingers is a 30 million volt charge. If that charge goes down at all, it results in the ATPA spin rate going down. What do we know the spin rate is today? That we didn't know when I started medical school, 9,000 revolutions per minute. So if you think about one spin per minute versus 9,000, every disease that you know is in between those two numbers. And it turns out the charge on that membrane is what controls the spin rate. That's it. That's all you need to know. And why is this a good thing to understand? Because think about the implications of what I just told you. That means that if you have, no matter what the disease is, whether you're Scott Kelly and you want to get your 27% muscle mass back, that you can reverse all diseases in all situations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's really what it means. Why is that such toxic news for the Rockefeller paradigm? They want to make you a drug client for the rest of your life. They certainly don't want you to know that it's actually possible with biophysics to change it. And this is reflected in the space program again. Why? The American space program has chosen pharma over physics. Okay. This Russian space program has chosen physics over pharma. And when you actually parse that out, in my view, the easiest way to educate people who don't know about these paradigm changing kind of things, start with the space program and work from there, and then realize what the main difference is. Rockefeller wants you to believe it's all about oxygen, and the Russians want you to believe it's all about CO2. If you start there, then you start going, okay, why is that the case? And I will tell you, I think it's the most fruitful rabbit hole you can go down. And I tell people this, who I've done hundreds of podcasts on these topics, but what nobody really has ever parsed out and asked me, when I started down this rabbit hole myself, when I was in the situation like most of the people watching this are, I want to know what really moves the needle. I translated about $200,000 worth of Russian physiology after reading Becker's work and after reading a fable by Robin Sharma called "The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Is this possible? What in this book is possible?" And I found out in the Rockefeller paradigm it was impossible, but in the Russian paradigm it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Okay, I need to go jump down this rabbit hole and figure out why ultimately the environment, the geopolitical environment, tried to block the science and space and also Becker. I mean, our government, DARPA, ended Becker's career. So I knew that the Russian space program and Becker had to have a link. So that's why I went to the extraordinary length to spend a lot of money 25 years ago to translate these papers. And it turns out from that proof of work that I did, I distilled down the message into two protocols, the leptin prescription and cold thermogenesis protocol. Both of those protocols were written in 2005. Okay. So we're 21 years past that now.
Mhm.
So many of the things that you'll probably ask me about today, for me, they really are old hat. Why? Because I've written and spoke, been to conferences. I
Mhm.
talk about, the science that underpins both of them. The interesting thing I think about both is that neither are underpinned by biochemistry. Both are biophysical protocols.
I love what you've been speaking about more recently too. I'd love to talk about that, but I'm picking up what you're putting down and I love it, man. I've listened to dozens of your podcasts. In fact, and everything you're speaking about, I've been just parroting to my clients and giving them the resources, leptin protocol and such, and sending them to your site. And I've got a Google Doc. I'll put it in the show notes for anybody listening. It's all of the episodes that I've listened to from Jack. There's 30 some podcast episodes. There's 60 plus hours of his conversations with other people, and I put them in an order that I think is most relevant for someone coming in to start with Jack's work and kind of take you down the rabbit hole step by step. Um, so I was really vocal in 2020, speaking about what you're saying about Rockefeller medicine and everything. It's obvious at this point, in my opinion, like you're either on the boat or you're not. And so, I wanted to go into this conversation with the prerequisite understanding that my followers, my audience, my community, we're doing everything we can to the best of our ability to get outside, get in the sun, ground, and get off tech as much as possible. And so I love how
Those
you
are
reference.
those are all the good things, but now the next question is that you got to ask yourself, are all those things equivalent in all places on earth? And the answer is they're not.
Right.
So I think that's where the next big issue happens. Remember what Rockefeller medicine teaches people, that your genetic code trumps your zip code. I tell you exactly the opposite. Your zip
Right.
code trumps your genetic code. So then you got to ask yourself, what about your local environment has changed? I don't know. And the simple way for you to do this is you can go back 25 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. I think most people that are alive today would be wise at least to take their beliefs back to pre-industrial United States. Why? Because that's where the robber barons, which Rockefeller was one, that's where the game began to change. And then how things have changed in health, since that time. The
Mhm.
most operational time for Americans specifically is probably 1942 now. Why? Because that's when the biotechnology arm of the Rockefeller Foundation started to work in unison with the big pharma arm after Standard Oil is broken up. And when you see that synergy and what the real goal was, it becomes very simple to save your members and your listeners a lot of time. The Rockefeller paradigm basically was an anti melanin paradigm. So, how did they do that? Anything that made the sun toxic was something they parroted.
Yeah.
They did it through not only sunscreens, but the big one was they did it through elevating glyphosate into the food chain because glyphosate is a melanin competitive inhibitor. So when you understand that when you introduce all of these things, they deuterate your water table, which ruins the biochemistry. This is the reason why biochemistry isn't the level that you want to understand at. You have to really understand what deuterium and water physically do and what sunlight does to that pair. And then the big one, which is the new one that everybody is kind of ignored, And for good reason, because we've always assumed that the Earth's magnetic field was consistent, 50 nanotesla, just about everywhere. And turns out that's no longer true.
Hmm.
And that has been failing on Earth since 1859. You don't have to go back that far with magnetism. I think you really need to just go back to December 21st, 2012, because that's when the North Pole started running from Canada to Siberia. And I think everybody knows that now. But what the implications of that are, it's changed the magnetic footprint in some places on Earth by 66%. It's other places, it's gotten almost 300, 400% stronger. Uh, and when you understand that that now is a variable that you have to add in, that's the reason why I'm trying to explain to people that zip code trumps genetic code. I'm not trying to make this difficult. I'm trying to make you understand that light, water, and magnetism is a very dynamic couple. Um, it was much easier for me prior to probably 1 year ago to have these discussions on podcasts. Why? Because we would spend most of the time talking about light and water and very little time talking about magnetism. And you can see since the new swarm data has come out, since the USGS stuff has come out, and there's been such a humongous change since 2012 in magnetic flux, we now have to start with magnetism because it turns out even if your light is really good and your water table is good, magnetism can fuck those other two things up pretty bad. And the best place that you can see that today is actually in South America and Africa. Why? That's where the phenotype of humans has been changed the most by magnetic flux. And this is the reason why we're seeing now fit people dropping dead. It's also the reason why, like, for example, in Argentina, in the last 10 years, they have a loss of fertility by about 47% by their own numbers. This actually comes from Rockefeller numbers. So obviously that spawned the IVF industry in South America. But the interesting thing is the drugs are not working. So when you understand that leptin controls fecundity and fertility, you start going, wait a minute, is this really a biophysics story as well? And it turns out it is. So the reason I'm taking you on this little random walk is not to be a dickhead about it. What I'm trying to get people to really understand is that the biophysics really is the base layer of understanding health, well-being, and also avoiding the centralized sausage grinder that is centralized medicine. And to me, I think anybody who's interested in health optimization, that should be top of the list. And I think you pointed it out, although you were very covert about it. COVID, starting in 2020, actually has gotten more people on my side of the ledger than the Rockefeller side. Why?
For
Because
sure.
I think most people know that they've been lied to over the
Yep.
last 6 years. But the problem is they don't know how bad the lie really is and how deep the gravity well is for those lies. But even in the last 6 years, I've actually done podcasts to examine that. Uh, and I would tell you, it's additive to the effects that you and I are talking about, right now.
Hmm. I agree completely, man. And like the Danny Jones episode was great. The rabbit hole is there. And, the people on my side of the fence are the people that are like, we hear what you're putting down. We want a Mel Gibson from The Patriot. I love you use Thomas Jefferson as the example. And so, that was kind of, and your fucking episode with Alexis recently blew my mind, the magnetism episode. And like
Yeah, that
the,
was the one that I decided I had to do after the guys came down from Alex Jones and kind of like misrepresented,
mm,
the science.
mm,
I didn't like the way that was,
mm.
sold and spread on Alex Jones. And then it was right when Alex Jones got thrown off of his current platform. He, to his credit, he did have me on and we did try to have a cogent discussion about it. I didn't let him interrupt me too much, but I still think that the magnetism angle, I think it's we have look, we have two guys out there. One guy I respect, the other guy I don't. Ben Davidson and the ethical skeptic. they're talking about these magnetic apocalypses. I don't think we're in a magnetic apocalypse. I think we're in an excursion.
Hmm.
There's 500 of them. We've only had five extinction events. So I think the mathematics is on our side.
Hmm.
Ben Davison tries to use the telluric currents of space to really scare the fuck out of people. And I think the ethical skeptic is doing something a little bit more genuine, where he's using ancient megaliths and the telluric currents that come out of Earth to try to explain why these megaliths are around and what they're all linked to.
Mm.
And I do think there's a lot more juice to his theory, which he's really co-opted from other people, but
Hmm.
he's a really diligent science guy.
Mm.
And I think you can tell that I don't really think Ben is. I think Ben is a lawyer that knows a lot about solar science, and I give him credit for that. But I just can't get behind, you know, the way he delivers the information that he delivers, because in
Hmm.
my world as a neurosurgeon, I don't want people thinking, that everybody's going to die in 3 or 4 months if you don't listen to this stuff. And I think that's what I try to put out
Hmm.
in the Alexis Cowan podcast so that everybody would know, I'm not, a catastrophist.
Hmm.
Probably the closest you'll get is I'm probably a capital anarchist. That's why I'm a Bitcoiner, because I don't like anything that's happening in geopolitics
Hmm.
and fiat money. And the reason for that is I don't like to see people controlled. And that should make sense. Why? Because nature is decentralized and so is Bitcoin. That's the reason I feel the way I do. I think anything decentralized is the way to go.
Hmm.
And it's also the reason why fundamentally I have a huge problem with AI. It's not
Hmm.
that I'm totally anti AI. I just want people to understand that when you use AI, it centralizes everything it touches.
Hmm.
So if it centralizes what it touches, that means it brings you closer to Rockefeller medicine or Rothschild banking. And I'm out on that. I'm very clear. I'm telling you my biases up front, that I do not like centralization and I don't think it's optimal for health or wealth. But I don't want you to think that the magnetic excursion that we're in right now um, is something that I think you truly need to start prepping for. Do I think you may have to think about where you live a little bit differently
Hmm.
than you probably did if you followed me, say, 6 months or 12 months ago? Yes, because I do think it's changed, the three-legged stool that I always teach people about, which is light, water, and magnetism. I think right now, magnetism is by far the number one leg of the stool. Why? For only one reason, because it's the one variable that's changing the most.
Hmm.
It used to be light from artificial light, but now it's not.
Hmm.
And it turns out that when magnetism changes, it actually, in my view, I don't know how you want to follow up questions with this, but the two things that I told you before about NAD and oxygen being the boundary conditions of your inner mitochondrial membrane, magnetism changes them the fastest. And the reason why is this one here gets deuterated, so it becomes NADD plus.
Hmm.
And this one is the most interesting one. This one tells you the reason why oxygen isn't how the biochemists sell it to you. Everybody thinks oxygen is oxygen is oxygen. It turns out the ground state of oxygen on Earth is paramagnetic. That means the two electrons spin up. When you have a magnetic excursion or a decline, you get anti-parallel spins in oxygen. What happens? Oxygen becomes dimagnetic. What does that mean? Paramagnetic versus dimagnetic. I'll explain it to you, your audience, very easily, and to you, and then I think you'll understand why it's a big deal. Um, you're from physics, you learned a long time ago in third, fourth, fifth grade. Michael Faraday has a law. When you have an electric current, electrons running through, which is what the inner mitochondrial membrane is, it induces a magnetic field. That magnetic field can be used to turn things. Well, on the inner mitochondrial membrane, I think everybody knows the cytochromes basically are a giant electron chain. Most people know it as the electron chain. It carries a 30 million volt charge. But the fourth cytochrome has this interesting thing that spins. It's called an FO head. And that is where the magnetic flux of this system comes out. Now, when it's working optimally, you get 9,000 revolutions per minute. But when we put this chain up again, what draws the electrons from NAD to oxygen? It turns out it's the electronegativity of paramagnetic oxygen.
Mm,
And then what happens? Paramagnetic oxygen is drawn to anything that has a magnetic field, which is that spinning head. So this raises the point. If you live in a place like, let's say, Argentina or Brazil, and the magnetic flux is reduced by 66%, what does it do to paramagnetic oxygen? It turns it to singlet oxygen. Singlet oxygen isn't drawn to a spinning head.
mm,
In fact, singlet oxygen is the thing that all the retards that are in functional medicine tell you kill you. It's oxidative biology.
mm,
That though, triplet state oxygen doesn't do that. That has been the ground state of life for 540 million years since the Cambrian explosion. So guess what? When that changes, and now we have hardcore evidence, you know, that it does. Anybody who's not a moron can go on the internet right now and find out that it's true what I'm saying, that the North Pole has gone from Canada to Siberia since December 21st, 2012. That presents a big problem for biology.
mm,
And that's the reason why having the discussion about magnetism makes sense, because it turns out, say if you work out in an indoor gym and you do it in shoes that are rubber, you just made your magnetic, how shall we say, sovereignty even worse. That means you're favoring destructive forms of oxygen. So that means that exercise can be a toxin. And that is totally counterintuitive to what everybody believes. But when you actually understand the biophysics of it, you go, wow, I need to understand this because this has huge implications. And it really plays a huge role if you happen to live in one of these places where there's a magnetic decline. So
mm.
that's the reason why that discussion needs to happen.
I agree. There's a saying that I love. When the plant's sick, you don't change the plant, you change the environment. And you look at the soil, you look at the light, you look at the water. And it's funny because it's like we're just complex plants in a sense. And so I love that you touched on that piece about exercise. That's something that I've been hammering on for years in my own transition of like stopping to think, putting on plastic clothes and then this Wi-Fi headpiece to go into a blue lit box to work out on rubber. Like it just is fucking mind blowing how counterintuitive that is to health versus like just go for a walk outside, you're going to get more benefit from that. So
But
like,
you'll be surprised how many people online will actually argue with you.
right. Well, for sure.
And
Cause
they'll,
it makes
I will
sense.
tell you, like Peter Attia, who, is one of Rick's friends,
Yeah.
he famously said on a podcast with a guy named Chris Williamson that if you can't do 100 push-ups, the EMF from
Yeah.
Apple AirPods in your ear don't matter. Like you have to realize this guy has an MD. Now, he never finished his residency, so I can't say that he's an authoritarian expert in anything
Yeah.
because he's got incomplete Rockefeller education. Some people may actually even say that's a good thing. But Peter and I are diabolically opposite on this
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah.
Why? Because anybody who wears those Apple iPhones effectively is deuterating their water table in their head. I mean, most people don't realize these AirPods connect this way. They don't go around your head, they go right through your head. And it turns out right through your head where your ears are, your external auditory canal, there's a place between your third and fourth ventricle. And there's a very slim aqueduct there called the aqueduct of Sylvius. That's the Venturi effect. You actually, everything that you think about with wine vortexing actually happens in your CSF. Well, if you disrupt that through these Apple iPods in your head, you effectively deuterate the water table in your brain.
Mm.
So you actually become a retard
Mm-hmm.
by doing this. And I've been, I'm pretty saucy. You probably know that online. And
Salty
I've
Jack.
I've actually told people that this is one of the reasons why you shouldn't hire Peter Attia because he's not smart.
Right.
He's not wise. And the advice that he gives is bad enough. But when you actually layer the biophysics on it and you look at it and you factually check what I'm telling you, then you go, wow, it's really bad. And remember, I tried to do the podcast with Rick, and Rick was cool about talking about my advice to him before his heart surgery with the use of methylene blue.
Mm.
And Peter Attia was the one that told him that I was crazy.
Hmm.
So, what I try to explain to people is you need to vet your experts really well. Like who's packing your parachute matters. And I think just as I tried to highlight the astronaut for you before as a good place for you to understand the difference between pharma and physics, I think Peter Attia defines Rockefeller pharma medicine, and I define the biophysics on the other side.
Yep.
So I think when you see our two opinions and you understand the perception where it's coming from, then you'll understand why we see things so differently.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And how ironic even more the emails that come out with Atia. And it's just like
I don't think
classic.
it's ironic. I actually think it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Why?
Right. Yeah.
Because those people were the people that centralized Rockefeller medicine. You want to know the
Yep.
funny part? I mean, I've laid this out in podcasts already. The GLP-1 craze directly comes from Epstein. And remember, this is somebody
Mm,
who Peter Attia looked up to, took care of as a patient. The DOG emails are clear on that. When you
mm,
understand that Epstein was hired by Rockefeller to biohack the Human Genome Project to find out everything he could about chromosome 2, then
mm,
we find out on the Bitcoin side, he does the same thing through MIT math and physics department.
mm.
Begin to see that they're protecting not only their medical franchise, but also their monetary franchise. Why? Because let's face it, you follow the money in anything, you're going to be led down a path. And here's the point that I made to you earlier. Epstein is just like AI. He's a centralizing force,
Hmm.
but he was a centralizing force for Rockefeller in medicine and the Rothschilds in banking. And the DOJ emails clearly show that he was also paid by the Rothschilds $25 million a year. So when you actually see this in the framework, I think, unfortunately, since we're talking more about health, I don't think people really understand that when you bring up these emails, there's actually a teleologic good explanation of why these emails should matter and who you hire for your experts.
Hmm.
And I think when you understand that decentralized thinking encapsulates not only biology, but also the thermodynamics of decentralized things like nature and monetary issues,
Mm.
I think this is kind of a good walk for people to really understand. Because I always tell people, don't believe a thing that comes out of my mouth. I want you to don't trust me, verify it. But once you verify it, then you have a duty to go out and tell people, look, this is actually true.
Right. I agree, and that's where I'm at. And yeah, ironic, not necessarily the right word, but when that someone sent that to me, one of my guys on my team, I'm like, of course. Are you surprised that, like, of course, that makes
A lot
absolute
of people
sense.
were surprised, though, to be
Right.
honest.
Right, right. Yeah. Well,
I
people in your
think they were
community.
surprised because I don't think they realized the implications. Most people would just say, oh, this is just, one rich guy paying a doctor a lot of money to take care of him. I don't see it that way.
No
I
way,
see
bro.
it, I see it a little bit differently
Agreed.
because I happen to know what Epstein was paid to do in 1983 with chromosome 2. And like I said, that leads directly to the leptin melanocortin pathway. And that's a pathway that Peter Attia knows nothing about at
Hmm.
all. And that's also by design. It
Mm,
doesn't surprise me why Epstein would seek him out to make sure he kept him as dumb as possible,
mm,
that he would be as popular could be, so that he would keep people using peptides,
yeah,
GLP-1s, and all the, fruitful profiteering that comes from the Rockefeller bag of tricks in big pharma.
totally. Yeah, I agree with that. That you connected some dots there for me too with his history. I didn't know about that. His work with the chromosome 2, and that now it just makes even more sense,
Yeah, he
because
was hired by David Rockefeller. You remember when I went off on the Danny Jones podcast about Casey and Callie Means, and I told you
yep.
that their dad worked directly for David Rockefeller. Well, that group of people is called the Council of Foreign Relations,
Mm,
the Atlantic Society. So here's the most interesting link, to Epstein. In 1983, when he was 30 years old, he was made a charter member of the CFR without ever going through the formal process. He
mm,
was also added to the Trilateral Commission. Why was that done? So that he could get direct access to the people that were at MIT and Harvard running the Human Genome Project, because David Rockefeller's family had a specific goal. That goal was to find out everything you could about chromosome 2, because the family's biotech wing started in 1940 and did all the work through MK Ultra,
mm.
through light, but also wound up with glyphosate in 1975, and that's what they used to deuterate the food empire of the United States. That's the reason why people in the United States get fatter and the people in Europe don't. Most people think it's, the food, they blame it on this. The garbage pail term that most people talk about is processed food. That's true, but they have no idea the process was putting deuterium in it. And here's the
Mm,
craziest part of the story, from 1983 to now, we now have scientific papers that show if you feed any human deuterium, brown fat, which is right back here in the back of your neck as a baby,
mm,
turns into white fat. You feed them more deuterium, the white fat then divides and becomes more fat.
mm,
Okay. So, in other words, they knew really since about 1970 that deuterium does this. They buried it. And then what did they do? They came up with a new class of drugs to try to take all the
yep.
fat people and try to make them skinny, but without ever telling you the deuterium story.
Hmm.
That is the reason why they hired Epstein. And it's also the reason why they banned my TED Talk when it first came out, because they thought
Mm,
it was going to unleash this dragon about the leptin melanocortin pathway when I gave the talk in 2011. And it turned
mhm.
out I was a little bit too smart for that. I didn't really release that dragon until I got on that podcast with Rick and Huberman. That's part of the reason why. Um, I never really wanted to do that because I knew it put a target back on me.
Yep.
And that's what's made probably the last 3 or 4 years of my life kind of interesting.
Yeah, I bet. I really appreciate you going into some of that because there's some things that touched on there that were definitely helpful for me that connected some dots, and I know there's some relevance there for my community. My thoughts, you know, we can go forward with this in whatever conversation you think is most appropriate. But my kind of premise is WWTJD. What would Thomas Jefferson do at this point? There was a couple terms there, or there was a couple things that you said on the Alexis podcast. How do we defrag the lattice and how do we get rid of deuterium? I think are two things that I'm personally interested in. I think that tie into this to a degree, but yeah, what can we do?
The number one easy way, and this assumes that you do have good magnetic flux,
Hmm.
is grounding with the sun. That, like, the sun is the way we're designed to defrag. You have to realize there's two issues here. We already talked a little bit about the first one, is the vortexing of the heart and the blood and the CSF. The reason why a vortex works for deuterium depletion or isotopic fractionation, you have to remember what a vortex is. And I know most people know what a whirlpool is,
Hmm.
but when you put something in there that has a higher atomic mass, it gets pushed out to the outside.
Hmm.
This the stuff that is less atomic mass stays in the center.
Hmm.
Well, it turns out in the brain, the target is the floor of the fourth ventricle in the center. And that's where the vagal motor trigone is. Why? Because it turns out the vagus nerve's real goal, it's not what you were taught in medical school. It's actually to get rid of deuterium. And
Crazy.
eventual goal is to turn your turds through circadian mechanism called the gastrocolic reflex into a Bristol stool 4. Bristol stool 4 is when you take a dump and you don't need toilet paper because all the deuterium is in your turd and not in your body. Your vagus is really important in terms of doing that. So when you ask me the question about defragging, you can use deuterium depleted water. You
Hmm.
can do everything possible to make the vortex both in your heart and your brain better. Some of those things are pretty obvious, like getting out in nature and being grounded. But some of the big ones is, can you use TENS units on your body to be like a vagal nerve stimulator?
Oh,
And you can
wow.
also buy vagal nerve stimulators that are now
Hmm.
over the counter. You can do that. And where do you put them? You do put them on the tragus of your ear, right here, or your earlobe. Why? This is where being a neurosurgeon makes a difference. Your external auditory canal is innervated by cranial nerve 10, which is the vagus nerve. So
Hmm.
this is the reason why that helps. And then remember, you need to know, depending on what the problem is, if you want to improve the deuterium depletion in your turds, the way to do that is make sure you do your right vagus. So you do the right ear. The reason why is the right and left vagus innervation pattern in humans is different. The left side goes around the ductus arteriosus on the aorta, and it goes a recurrent loop goes back up to your voice box. That's the reason why humans talk, because we can actually defrag our left side better than our right. But it turns out the thing that makes your turds is more of the right vagus nerve that runs in the tracheoesophageal groove. So, what's another thing you can do if you don't want to spend the money on a vagal nerve stimulator? You can use a TENS unit and put it in different spots where the vagus goes. Those
Totally.
things are easily able to be found on a simple
Yep.
SEO search on Yandex. And I do use Yandex. I don't use Google because it's a Russian search. So you get much better SEO when you do that.
Hmm.
And then the next one that you could do is, say, if you don't want to use electricity, even if it's battery powered, you can use castor oil. Castor oil can be placed in your belly button on a cotton ball, and then you take one of those big band aids and put it over your belly button. Why does this work? Well, let's think about what happened when you were a baby. You were connected to your mom through the umbilical cord. The umbilical cord leaves a scar inside your abdomen, and it's a flap of scar tissue that has 70,000 vagal nerve endings in it.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
when you use hexane free castor oil, it is a cis chemical, cis meaning a chiral chemical that mimics melanin. So what are you effectively doing? You're actually making all the electrons and oxygen spin the appropriate way. This actually helps you clear deuterium from your blood. Why is that? Let's talk about that.
Hmm.
Melanin does a lot of interesting things. You know that we talked about glyphosate being a melanin competitive inhibitor.
Hmm.
Melanin actually chelates metals. Okay, that's what it does. But it also does something else to deuterium. Most people don't know that deuterium and H plus have a different nuclear magnetic moment. This is, again, back to the physics. And it turns out the reason why we have so much melanin, not only in our skin, but in our arterial system, is it keeps the deuterium where it's supposed to be in the blood. That's why the blood vortexing is important. Where does the blood vortexing come from? Evolutionary history. Back at the Cambrian explosion, fish were the first ones that started to vortex their hearts, but they only had one chamber heart. So the vortex wasn't big, but it
Hmm.
didn't matter because they were swimming in electron dense water.
Hmm.
Then amphibians come along and they have three chamber hearts. Three chamber hearts made a much more chaotic vortex. That meant you could control deuterium and H plus more appropriately. Then we come, the mammals, 320 million years ago, and we have four chamber hearts. We have the most complex vortex. But what else did mammals do? This is the key. Mammals use melanin to isotopically fractionate. So you having a tan is probably one of the key things to do that. It turns out you always get your best tan when you're grounded to the magnetic dynamo. Why is that? Melanin is made with oxygen in the triplet state. Remember, we're back to that story again.
Hmm.
So it turns out if you're not doing grounding, you won't get as tan as you possibly could be.
Hmm.
Has huge implications now for the people that live in South America, because you can see, wow, that means that you can't make chiral molecules in your body. What are some of those? Melanin, collagen, ApoE.
Mm.
So is this the reason why people are getting more Alzheimer's? Is this the
Mhm.
reason why they're getting more Parkinson's? Is this the reason why, NFL players and athletes in gyms are tearing their Achilles and ACLs? The answer is yes, because the
Totally.
oxygen that they're using is singlet, not triplet.
Hmm.
But why is this story, to finish up the vortex story for you, important? Deuterium in itself is not bad. It's designed to be kept in the circulatory system. So, how do mammals do that? If you know anything about the way the brain forms, we have these neural crest cells, which is what melanin is part of. It's tied to chromosome number 2 to a gene called POMC. And alpha MSH is one of the cleave proteins that do this. What people don't really know well is that neural crest cells follow collagen, specifically two types,
Mm.
elastin and fibrillin. Where
Mm.
are they found the highest density? In your arteries. So, guess what? If the collagen is bad, will the melanin be able to follow where it's supposed to go when neural crest cells migrate when you're inside your mother? The answer is no.
No.
Okay. So that means that you can't fractionate deuterium well. What does that mean? It means deuterium leaves the blood and goes into the cytosol of the cell where it affects the mitochondria. Remember what the game of mammals is, to keep the deuterium away from that spinning head, because remember what we talked about before? If that spinning head slows down, you get disease. So when you understand the biophysics game is to keep the deuterium where it's supposed to be, in the arteries, you begin to realize, so this is the reason why um, deuterium can be well controlled through this process. And when you understand that the vagus nerve not only goes from the fourth ventricle, but it goes all the way down to your transverse mesocolon. So it covers almost every single major arterial tree in your body. So this gives the brain a feedback loop so it knows what the deuterium level is, not only in the heart, but in the CSF and the arterial system. And it
Mm.
does this because we have 7 different places in the brain that don't have a blood-brain barrier. And that's where the brain is sampling the deuterium levels
Mm.
in the body, so it gets its own feedback,
Hmm.
what's going on.
Mm.
So this is the reason why you're addicted by chromosome 2. We talked about this earlier,
Hmm.
from beta endorphin to go out and be addicted to the sunlight, because you need the sunlight to put the alpha MSH in your arterial tree to keep the deuterium away from your nano motors, which are the FO and F1 head. And if you do that, that means you keep the charge between that 30 million volts between NAD and triplet oxygen. That's really the whole game.
Hmm.
That's what I spent 18 months and $200,000 learning from the Russian physicists. And then, over a process of several years, putting these terms together so that I can sit down with you in a podcast and explain to you, so that you don't have to spend $200,000 learning what I learned.
Hmm.
You can clearly now go back and fact check it. But the good news for you is everything that I've just told you in the last probably 20 minutes, there's now books written about all these things.
Hmm.
You can go and read the biophysics books and say, son of a bitch. Like when I started this, these books didn't exist. And you probably understand why that's the case. It goes back to the Epstein story. Who was his girlfriend? Ghislaine Maxwell. Who was
Hmm.
her father? Robert Maxwell. They controlled Pergamon Press, which controls all the journals and the books and publishers in medicine. Well, if they didn't want this information out, they were in the catbird seat to keep it away. So that's how they kept the Flexner report bullshit game, which is why Eddie Chang said 50%. Now you can see why Uncle Jack said 99%, because everything I just got finished telling you, most doctors don't learn in their biochemistry book.
Yeah, nobody. Yeah, and you put it simply enough. I feel like I got a decent grasp on that. We want to keep the deuterium away from the cytosome, you said, so
Oh,
that
no,
way,
the ATPase, the spinning head and mitochondria, because it
right, the
destroys
mitochondria.
the mitochondria in this wiring diagram I just showed you here.
Hmm.
It's racist. It only likes H plus. It doesn't like deuterium.
Hmm.
The blood is where deuterium is supposed to stay.
Hmm.
And the reason why we keep it there is because To make a vortex, you need atomic mass. Think about it. You can't make a whirlpool if you don't have something with heavier atomic mass.
To spin it, yeah.
Yeah. And when you understand it like that, you start going, okay, this makes a lot of sense now. And
Hmm.
then when you realize that CSF, which is cerebral spinal fluid, is an ultrafiltrated blood, and you say, wait a minute, we're spinning that too between the third and the fourth ventricle. Like the body is doing some pretty amazing things. And all those amazing things are biophysical, they're not biochemical.
Hmm.
And when you understand that it's all to maintain that 9,000 RPMs in every single mitochondria in your body, you start going, well, okay, wait a minute. I need to understand that little wiring diagram between NAD and oxygen. And that's the reason why making sure oxygen paramagnetic is absolutely paramount. And the only way NAD gets deuterated is if your water table gets deuterated, because deuterium leaks out of the blood and goes into the cytosol and starts that whole process. So the question you asked me about defragging, you can understand 100% oxygen does that. That's why anesthesiologists use it when they defrag you when they're trying to wake you up. Now,
Hmm.
you can't get 100% oxygen unless you buy an oxygen tank and do it, but that's another way to do it. A lot of other people try to use HBO machines and things like that. I wouldn't do that. One of the best ways to defrag, which we talked about, but we didn't get into too big, is cold thermogenesis, which is the reason why I wrote the protocol
Yeah.
at the same time I wrote the leptin prescription protocol.
Hmm.
Because when you get cold, what do? You're knocking the deuterium back into the blood and keeping it there. Well, how else does magnetism work with cold? Most people know this. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. It's called the Curie point, and that's Madame Curie's husband. Um, he won a Nobel Prize for this effect. It's called the Curie point. Means the colder things get, the more magnetic they get. Now, there's a couple of ways we can break that. I'm actually teaching people that right now. That's how the Mayans did it in their excursion. They used rare earth elements in the buildings that they built to create these very special Faraday cages for an excursion.
Huh.
That's what Tikal is. That's what Chichen Itza is. And they were doing it for another specific reason. All of their pyramids were built over cenotes, and you know what cenotes are, right?
Hmm.
Those are their water table. All the water for the whole Mayan Riviera, there's no rivers. It comes only from cenotes.
Mm.
Where do the cenotes come from? The last extinction event, which was 66 million years ago, from an asteroid that hit in that area. And that's the reason why there's rare earth elements there. Why? Because they're extraterrestrial.
Hmm.
So the Mayans actually figured out how to purify and defrag their water using rare earth elements. Now I'm teaching people how to do it utilizing the periodic table on my
Hmm.
blog. Why? Because it turns out if you live in a place that's magnetically declined, some of the things that the Nubians, the Egyptians, the Mayans did that seem counterintuitive to you, you start seeing it and go, so that's the reason why we find all these big piezoelectric stones that people were going in, like Göbekli Tepe. Or you
Hmm.
start thinking about Stonehenge differently. You start thinking about Easter Island differently. When you find out that all these stones were selected and brought to an area because the stones were piezoelectric.
Mm.
Piezoelectricity is also a biophysical term, and that allows you to turn light into current. Uh, can that be used to protect you when you have a problem? Because what is the key problem in a magnetic excursion that ties to the vortex story I just gave you? So I'll give you my hand here. You make believe this is the tectonic plate. Below here is the dynamo. Okay. When this gets weak, the atmosphere here on the top of my hand here
Mhm.
is the Van Allen radiation belt. It comes closer to Earth when this gets weaker. What happens in the hydrology cycle of Earth? More deuterium and tritium fall into the water table where the things that live on the planet live. So, guess what the Mayans were kind of doing? They were paying attention to the telluric currents in space and the ones coming from below, and they were figuring out that when Aurora showed up at the 20th north latitude, that there was going to be way more deuterium in the cenote water, and that was going to harm them.
Mm.
They figured out a pretty ingenious way to filter their water utilizing rare earth elements and piezoelectric blocks. And when you see this for yourself, you realize that they're probably the only ancient civilization that made it through their excursion unscathed. Why? You can come to El Salvador, Guatemala, and Mexico today and see Mayan people. Like when you go to Africa today, you don't see ancient Nubians. You don't see ancient Egyptians. And if we really take it back to the biggest last excursion, the last champ event, you don't see Neanderthals running around. They were taken out in that event. They became us, or
Mm.
we became them,
Mm.
however you'd like to focus it. But the remnant that is true, several people out there who've done genomic studies with, Ancestry or 23andMe found out that they had remnants of Neanderthal DNA in them.
Yep.
And when you understand that the Neanderthals had bigger brains than us, but would they shrank their brains to make a bigger vortex, it points out something that we started this podcast off with. Does having bigger muscles really mean longevity? Well, it turns out if you look at the brain, it's exactly the opposite. The
Opposite.
Neanderthal brain shrunk, and we do better than them
Yep.
because we make a bigger vortex. It actually points out the same thing that I'm trying to point out to you. Having bigger muscles is actually a thermodynamic um, anchor. It's not a good thing to do.
Cost. Yeah.
Especially true when you're in an area that the magnetic flux is not great. You can't vortex,
Right.
in your heart, or you can't vortex in your CSF. And it sounds counterintuitive until we have a discussion like this.
Yeah.
You start going, wow, I never saw how these things really connected.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that if you ever listen to Peter Adiu's podcast, you'll never get this information because he doesn't understand any of the physics behind it. And I think since we're currently in our magnetic excursion, and
Mm-hmm.
we've been in it since probably 1859, it's probably pretty smart for you to pick up at least some of these concepts and, do your own due diligence and learn about, hey, what can I do to defrag myself?
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, on Amazon now, you can go out and buy copper rings. You may not know this, but I'll give you a history lesson because you may dig this. You remember the Carrington event happens in 1859. In 1860s, we have this big toxic problem in France called phylloxera. It kills all the old ancient rootstocks of the fancy wines. And that one of the first growth wines is called Mouton Rothschild. What did the Rothschilds do back when this happened? Uh, Wine grows great in clay. Clay is very dense, which the water that fell down from that CME that hit us deuterated the water fields. That's actually the real reason the plants died. So
Mm-hmm.
how did they solve for X? The smart French, not the Rothschilds, they actually started to put copper rings in the vines. And
Mm-hmm.
they found out that copper was another way for them to keep the plants alive. Who took that information in the early 20th century to its nth degree? Who was taken out by the Rockefellers? A Russian physicist called Lakarsky.
Mm.
And what did he start doing? He made these incomplete copper rings, and he would go into hospitals from about 1925 to 1942, and he'd place these rings and these vortexes on people, and magically they would start to get better.
Mm-hmm.
Well, magically he got run over by somebody who worked for the Rockefeller paradigm in 1942 in New York City. Who took up the science from there? A guy named Slim Sperling later in the 20th century. He started to make copper rings that were fully clothed, and he started to do some really interesting things with, copper and vortexing water, things
Yeah.
that he picked up from Victor Schoberger.
You're right.
And he found that there's a big effect there. So this company on Amazon now has started to make these necklaces and bracelets that are made out of copper that mimic Slim Sperling's rings,
Mm,
but now they're infusing them with rare earth elements, specifically neodymium magnets.
sick.
So when I told you I just came back from Europe because I spoke at a Bitcoin conference in Prague, on that trip, all the people in my family wore these necklaces around their neck. Why? Because it creates an implosion effect on your vagus nerves so that you can vortex while you're in space. How did I know to do that? Turns out the Russians started to do that for their cosmonauts in 1971.
Yeah.
So when you actually see the science from the space program show up with these events that happened in the 20th century, and then you realize that the Russians started to use CO2 differently than the United States Space Center. And it turns out CO2 is a magnetic gas. Carbonated water is another way for you to defrag
Hmm.
your deuterated water table. So you may be shocked to hear what the Russians did. They took all the astronauts on their tectonic planet in the 50s and 60s, and they started to put all these free water stations that were carbonated everywhere in the Eastern Bloc. And what were they doing? They were seeing the effect on their own population
Sick.
before they changed the Russian space capsules. And what did
Mm.
they do? They started to use another Russian scientist you may have heard of, Buteyko breathing. Buteyko was a Russian physiologist that used more CO2, and he took big time advantage of the Bohr and Haldane effect. That goes directly to the electromagnetic flux that I told you about that makes paramagnetic oxygen go there. What was the whole point of this Russian story? They were trying to improve uh, magnetic flux in the capsule after their cosmonauts died in 1971. Who ironically gave him that idea? Robert O. Becker and his
Mm.
canceled work. And who canceled them? DARPA, the American side of the story. So when you actually see the pieces and parts of this whole story and you go, so we can actually buy these copper magnetic things now and use this when we're flying. Because remember, what is jet lag? What did I just teach you in this podcast? Whether you know it or not, jet lag and a magnetic excursion are one and the same. Why? Think about it. I told you before that the dynamo gets weakened, Van Allen belts come down. Well, what happens when you're on the
You go
tectonic?
up.
You go up in the air.
Yeah.
You do the same thing, don't you?
Same. You're right.
Which means you're deuterating and tritiating yourself when you fly. So
Hmm.
what does that mean if you're smart? Maybe I should protect myself and increase my vagal flux when I'm flying,
Hmm.
and maybe I won't get jet lag.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, guess what? That's exactly what Uncle Jack did when he flew to Czech Republic. I was perfectly fine when I got there.
Dude.
Now, eat anything? No.
No.
Did I wear the jewelry? Yes. Did I look at any of the screens that were in first class in front of me? No. All of those things deuterate your water table when you're
Yep.
flying. And you're designed not to eat. Why? Because remember I told you about cytochrome 1 to oxygen. The more you eat, the more action goes across there. Why is this important for you to understand? The Japanese lost a $1 billion satellite when they flew it through the SAA, which is
Mm,
the
yeah.
Atlantic anomaly, in 1996. And you know what they found? They found because they left the computers on and electrons are moving, the deuterium and tritium that the unit flew through fried it. So when I heard that, I wrote a long time ago a jet lag prescription that Ben Greenfield asked me to write.
Mm,
And one of the things that's in it said you should always fast. You can drink water, but try to drink carbonated water when you do it. You probably know now why I said that.
totally.
But the reason you don't want to eat is because you need to turn your satellite off, your
Right.
mitochondria, when you're flying and you're going through, these areas. And when you see this for yourself,
Totally.
going, so Jack has been kind of telling us this biophysics the whole way through. Like all these hacks of defragging, they're out there in his blogs. They're out there in the things he's writing. The problem is we're too retarded to understand really what he's saying.
Hey, yeah. It takes a
And
while.
then when you do podcasts like this and people see your logic and your reasoning, they go, is this really survival of the fittest or is it survival of the wisest?
Correct.
Peter Pia will tell you it's survival of the fittest. I think in your podcast, I've pretty much laid the case that it's survival of the wisest, especially when the planetary magnetic field is going wonky a little bit,
Right.
especially when, we have governments giving us LED bulbs and taking incandescence away, especially when we have big agra and Rockefeller medicine poisoning the water table with deuterium through a variety of different ways. And when you begin to see that your goal as a decentralized mitochondria is to optimize light, water, and magnetism and understand what that truly means, I don't think the game is that hard to get.
Right. I agree. I agree with you completely. It's so funny about the fasting thing when flying. I've been telling my tribe that for years, and mainly just from direct experience of my own noting when you're tuned in, when your system's clean and clear, you you can pick up on a lot of this stuff. Your body will tell you. You'll get the information. And like, what's the definition of fitness in my mind? It's fit to adapt. Like wisest. I totally agree. Fitness is your capacity to adapt to the environmental demands, and that doesn't mean absolute strength. Like it's wisest. I totally agree. Is actually the marker of fitness.
We actually know that the Neanderthals were stronger than us and they're extinct.
Right.
I mean,
Way stronger. Yeah.
that really should actually hammer the meathead paradigm that's out there, but it doesn't. Why? Because you have to realize Rockefeller science is on their side.
Hmm.
You have to know that as the user, the end user. If you don't, um, then some of the things that I say, like, and you don't understand the context, you think I'm crazy.
Hmm.
It turns out I'm not crazy. I've done more homework on this than anybody walking this planet for the last 25 years. And trust me, I didn't believe a goddamn thing that I believe today 25 years ago.
Hmm.
I would have said it was crazy. But after going down the rabbit hole and questioning what I was taught, um, I basically do these podcasts to explain to people if I could do it as a centralized neurosurgeon, you can certainly do it as well.
Hmm.
And I don't think it's as hard as everybody thinks it is.
Hmm. Yeah. It's just time and effort put forth. I mean, I used to be that meathead guy. I was your prototype Chad 12, 15 years ago. Like I was that guy. And I've rewired my whole approach for a lot of great reasons. And I've, had a lot of great support and teachers like you on the path. But, I've even heard you mention in the movement space Erwin LaCour as another great example of moving more in the direction. For me, like I'm a pragmatist in a lot of ways where it's practical application of the skill. Like, what are you going to do with all of that meat? Like I fit to function, fit to serve your community. And I don't know if there was a closing note we could loop into this. The two things that I wanted to come into was what can the individual do? And we nailed some really good points, some stuff I haven't heard you talk about in the ways that you have before. And then also, if you want to, tie in or just, speak to the community, say you've got a group of savages, you got a group of mitochondriacs, what can the community do in ways to kind of move the needle? I saw your Cribs episode of the Costa del Sol property, and I'm doing something really similar here. I'm in 6 acres of a pine tree forest, and we're, you know, I think trying to create these little nodes, these healing spaces for people to come and reconnect and learn this stuff over a period of time because it takes time to figure it out. And so, what would be your message to the community?
I think focusing on light water magnetism, it's still true that seeing the sunrise is incredibly important, but you have to do it grounded to a place that really allows grounding. Like
Mhm.
I need to explain to you, grounding is a synonym for magnetic flux. You have to become magnetically sovereign in the changes on the planet. And then I think the water side is the easiest part. Most people can go and spend money to improve their water. The two ways to do that, if you're lazy, you just go buy water from high latitudes. If you're a savage, you go get primary water that comes deep out of the earth that is not deuterated and it's not been polluted by the surface level water. That's what the people in Europe used to do. Like all those big castles that are in Germany that are on rocks, realize they used wells from primary water sources. If you want to learn a little bit about primary water, look up a guy named Stefan Rees. He's
Okay.
in blogs that I've written about recently. His work has been buried also through the Rockefeller Foundation and a specific group in California called the Wonderful Company. They want to make sure you never learn about
Mm.
this. It's a real important thing. And just to, I guess, finish this up, why drilling your own well is important. This is probably one of the coolest things I can tell you because it still exists today in the middle of the Mojave Desert, which you know that I would not be a big fan of you building a citadel. This guy, Stephen Reese, went there, looked at all the maps, and he was a dowser as well. So he was very intuitive.
Mm.
He told the owner of this land that if they went down 672 feet, they would hit primary water.
Mm.
So this guy spent the money, drilled down there. In the middle of the Mojave Desert, a city was born called California City. It's still there today, close to 100 years after this guy did what he did. So this is a community in a desert in California that doesn't use any of the Colorado River water that comes, which is completely deuterated and
Mm.
filled with natural fluoride.
Mm.
The reason I mention this to you, it tells you that one of the things I do think you should spend your Bitcoin for is to make sure that your water source is pure. If you can't afford to drill a well that deep because it will cost some money, you have to realize this water will continue on. Some of these wells that he drilled are still operational in the desert in the Middle East. Like
Mm.
the Saudi royal family brought him over. And for those of you who think that this is nonsense, if you listen to other podcasts that I've done, I tell a story about President Bukele telling about a lot that his family wanted to buy as a coffee finca, and everybody tried to talk him out of it because it didn't have good water. And I famously looked at the topological maps and I told him if you drill down deep enough, you will find primary water, you'll probably find rare earth elements, and you'll probably find a lot of gold. And guess what? When he did it, he found all three.
Mm.
So when you understand that primary water, just like oil, is a renewable resource of tectonics, you begin to realize that the story you've been told by the Rockefellers to call it fossil fuels to make you think it's rare or
Mhm.
scarce is also false.
Yeah.
We naturally make water through the process of tectonics. We do the same thing with oil. Your goal in an excursion is to find that water in your local environment. And even if you have to pool your money with people, I think it's a smart maneuver to do. Most people have been told things that I've said in the last year. Go buy high latitude water, find yourself a spring that's high latitude. The problem is, people like the Wonderful Company, they're making that really difficult for people to do, especially in places like California, and you need to actually be smarter than them. So having a good primary source of water is really important. And I think if I could highlight what this gentleman did, because he died in 1985, a lot of people don't know about him. The powers that be in the United States are trying to monetize water, just like
Mhm.
they try to monetize everything else.
Yeah.
When you begin to understand that water is one of the legs of the stool, never miss a sunrise, really elevate your water, and make sure you're ground and you're magnetically pinned. You do that. And I think those are the best things that one can do to stay away from the sausage grinder.
Hmm. You mentioned one thing too, just to add this on in regards to the magnetism conversation. You said Hawaii was not ideal, especially you mentioned specifically Mauna Kea, Big Island, Oahu. Could you
Yep.
just elaborate on that a little bit more and
Yeah, it's
any
actually
word on
pretty
Maui?
simple. For anybody who doesn't know their geology history, this is all published on my website for free. So if you go to the forum, it's there.
Hmm.
But this is what a lot of people don't know. I told you that there's been 500 excursions and 5 extinction events.
Hmm.
But what we didn't talk about is when's the last time a magnetic flip has been known to occur on Earth? It was 780,000 years ago. That's before the Cambrian explosion. It's 240 million years. before complex life. So what does that mean? It means that bacteria and archaea are the only living things on this planet that have navigated multiple flips. Eukaryotes have not. So where was Hawaii located in the last flip? This may stun you. It was the South Pole, where
Mm,
Antarctica is now.
mm.
So how do you know this? When my son was 6 years old, I took him to the Kilauea volcano that was actively erupting, and we flew over it, and I brought a compass. And I said, I'm going to teach you something you should never forget. And when we put the compass and we flew right over Kilauea, the compass just kept spinning. It didn't show where North or South Pole was. And my son looked at me and goes, Dad, why is this? I said, because that spot was made in the last magnetic pinning, which is before the flip. The whole island of Hawaii used to be the South Pole. Then I took him down to the big island right next to Kilauea, and he saw the same effect happen. I said, so just realize that if Ben Davidson or the ethical skeptic are correct, and we are, just say the Mayans may have been right, that we are in a true flip, Hawaii's the last place you want to be, bro, because it might be close to the South Pole.
What's the timeline on that? Like, how long do I have until
Nobody
I move
knows.
to El Salvador?
Nobody knows. That see, this is the thing that upsets me about Davidson, and not so much the ethical skeptic. Davidson's telling everybody it's happening, right here, right now. This is
Right,
the time.
right,
But I will tell you this: if you look at the history of Earth, because we can tell from rocks, magnetic hysteresis, that we are way overdue for a flip, probably by about 300,000 years. So the answer is it's a big deal. And I think as the data keeps coming in, we need to pay attention to that. The one thing I will tell you about this topic, I do have a reverence for the Mayans, not for the reason that you probably think. It's because they were, in the history of Earth, everything that I've studied, the most accurate timekeepers on the planet.
right.
Why? Because they were astronomers and they paid attention to the telluric currents in the ground. So they paid attention to both places. And their calendar, called the Long Calendar, spans about 26,000 years. And what did they notice about 2012? They noticed that three things happened at that time. And those three things all line up with us, meaning the Milky Way galaxy, flying through a very deuterated part of the galaxy. And they thought that this was a huge problem.
Mm,
The three things that are against us now also happen to do with wobbles in Earth and also solar cycles that one couldn't predict. And their belief that at least modern people have ascribed to them is that the end of the world would happen on December 21st, 2012. That's what people like Peter Attia would tell you. I'm not telling you that. I believe it's a process that began at that time. And if you look at the movement of the North Pole from December 21st, which is the winter equinox, and what was going on in Venus and Jupiter at that time, you'll begin to notice that something interesting started on Jupiter too. The red
mm,
spot on Jupiter and the South Pole hexagon
mm,
also changed on Jupiter. What does
mm,
that tell you? That the Mayans believe that the Milky Way is now going through a different part of space, is showing up on the most magnetically obvious thing in the solar system that we can see,
mm,
which they looked at through El Caracol.
mm,
They knew with precision, because they were equinox people,
mm,
that the process would really begin, the magnetic North Pole moving. The key in their issue in the long calendar is you need to see when you see CMEs or auroras show up in the tropics.
mm,
That happened for the first time in 2024 at the 18 north latitude, and it happened in the 12th south latitude in Brazil
mm,
in May of 24. So I'm going to tell you that the North Pole has been moving 55 kilometers a year. That's radically different than what's gone on since the Carrington event. So I have a reverence for the Mayans because I think they were warning us that the most likely time that a magnetic flip will happen will be sometime after 2012. Do I think it's going to be, 25 years, 50 years, 100 years? There's no way to know because we have evidence on Earth. For example, the longest one was almost 50 million years. That was the not KT, but the Permian extinction. We know that that was a huge magnetic excursion. Then there's other evidence that a magnetic excursion happened in one day.
Mm.
That's the one that Ben Davidson wants to sell you on.
Mm.
I'm not so sure. The answer is going to be 50 million years or one day, but I can tell you this. The Earth history tells us it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, the reason I don't spend a lot of time talking about the flip is because if the flip happens, we're done. It makes no sense to talk about it. What makes way more sense is to look at what the Mayans did during their excursion in their 4,500 years. They were able to survive it. And I think that that's what we're in. We've lost 9% of the Earth's magnetic shield in the last 10 years. So when you look at that slope of that line, that's pretty fucking steep. Like we don't have anything in the geologic history that we can marry to. So looking in human history is really ridiculous. The best thing we can do is look at the megalithic sites that don't make sense, and you'll find they all have links to paramagnetic stones and protection schemes that would have protected life while humans were alive. And do I believe that the Mayans did it better than anybody else? Yeah. So I think what I'm teaching people now is you want to optimize light, water, and magnetism the way the Mayans did it. Okay. That's the real answer I'm giving you. That's the reason why, I'm talking about wearing these coil rings with rare earth elements in it. It's the reason I'm talking to people about rare earths. I think it's the reason why Trump is interested in the tip of Greenland. Why? The highest level of rare earth elements on Earth are sitting right there at the tip of Greenland. And that is primary crust, meaning it's 4 billion years old. It's never been touched by man. Why? Because it's always been under ice. So when you understand what might be going on, I think this is kind of science that you want to pay attention to. It's easy to follow. This is where I do give Ben Davidson some credit. Like, go watch his YouTube videos. He has some interesting things to say. You should really pay attention to the sun and the solar weather. Why? Because when a CME is headed our way, if you are living in Hawaii and you see one, it's probably time for you to move to El Salvador or move someplace where you can be magnetically pinned on a volcano. And remember, the volcanoes that are right behind me here, they were made 65 to 80 million years ago when the North Pole was the North Pole as it is now. So you get an accurate reading. And it turns out if we do get a flip, it doesn't matter where you are on the planet, you're probably toast.
Correct.
But if you just get an excursion, boy, this matters quite a bit. It matters a lot because if you don't pay attention, you could wind up like our cousins, the Neanderthals.
This is great, Jack. Thank you so much, man. I think that's a good spot to wrap up right there. Thanks everybody for listening. Check the show notes. I'll drop some links for Jack. Anything to direct people to for you, Jack?
No.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll drop some links for you guys below and appreciate you guys tuning in. Drop any comments if you have them and make sure to go follow Jack with the links that I provide below. Take care, everybody.
All right. Take care.